What happened to the smartest girl at your school? I was in calculus when Charlotte Adams walked in 20 minutes late looking like hell. She sat down in her usual front row seat and just stared at the floor while Mr. Taylor handed back our tests. When he got to her desk, he paused before placing the test face down. Charlotte had a perfect 4.0 since 7th grade and was going to Stanford in the fall. She was the kind of student teachers used as an example. My mom taught English at our school and wouldn't shut up about how Charlotte was going to be someone important someday. Charlotte, can we talk after class? Mr. Taylor said quietly. She didn't respond, didn't even look at him. After class, I watched her walk past Mr. Taylor without a word. He called after her, but she just kept walking down the hallway like she couldn't hear him. The next day in English, Charlotte didn't turn in the essay that was worth 30% of our grade. My mom stood at her desk looking confused. Charlotte, where's your paper? She asked. Didn't do it, Charlotte said. The whole class went silent. My mom looked like Charlotte had just spoken in a foreign language. This is worth 30% of your grade. I know. My mom just stared at her, then moved on to collect everyone else's papers. After class, I heard my mom through the door saying something about the guidance counselor. Charlotte's voice came back cold and firm, saying she didn't need to talk to anyone. By the end of the week, Charlotte had failed 2 major tests and stopped showing up to half her classes. When she was there, she sat in the back staring at nothing. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days, with dark circles under her eyes and shaking hands. The rumors started immediately. Drugs, mental breakdown. Pressure finally got to her. Her best friend Maya told people Charlotte had blocked her on everything and wouldn't return calls. The following Monday, Charlotte's name was missing from the valedictorian announcement. Her scholarship to Stanford required her to maintain her GPA, and everyone knew she was going to lose it. Teachers kept trying to pull her aside. She ignored all of them. I saw her in the library that Wednesday, sitting alone at a table in the back, not studying, just staring at her hands. I walked over before I could stop myself. Charlotte, what's going on? I asked. You're throwing away everything you worked for. She looked up at me, and for a second I saw something desperate and terrified in her eyes before it disappeared. You should leave me alone, she said. Why are you doing this? I said. Because I have to. That doesn't make any sense, I said. She stood up suddenly, grabbing her bag. You don't know anything about my life. Stop asking questions. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd said, I have to, like she didn't have a choice. The fear that had flashed across her face. Something was really wrong and nobody was figuring it out. Thursday afternoon, I was leaving school late when I saw Charlotte walking fast toward the parking lot. There was a man waiting by a car and he looked angry. When Charlotte got close, he grabbed her arm hard enough that she flinched. I heard him say something sharp and threatening that I couldn't make out. Charlotte's whole body went rigid and she nodded, and he shoved an envelope at her before getting in the car and driving away. Charlotte stood there for a long moment holding the envelope. Her hands were shaking. When she finally moved, she walked to her car like every step hurt, and I saw her wipe her eyes before getting in. Friday morning, Charlotte wasn't at school. By lunch, the rumor was she'd been called to the principal's office with her mom because her GPA had dropped so much she was at risk of not graduating. Someone said they heard yelling. I saw her mom in the parking lot afterward, crying in her car. Charlotte walked past her without stopping and got into her own car. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped her keys twice. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The man in the parking lot and the envelope and the way Charlotte had looked terrified. On Sunday night, I drove to her house even though I barely knew her, even though she'd told me to leave her alone. I knocked on the door and her little brother answered. He was maybe 12 years old and looked scared. Is Charlotte here? I asked. She's not allowed to have visitors, he said quietly, glancing behind him nervously. Who says she's not allowed? Our dad. He's really strict now. Ever since... He stopped himself. Ever since what? The kid looked at me with these huge, frightened eyes. I'm not supposed to talk about it. Monday morning, Charlotte showed up to school with a black eye that she'd tried to cover with makeup. She walked straight past everyone with her head down. When my mom asked about the bruise, Charlotte said she fell. When the school nurse tried to talk to her, Charlotte said it was none of her business. At lunch, I found her sitting alone outside behind the gym. I sat down next to her without asking. I know something's happening to you, I said. And I know you're not failing because you stopped caring. She was quiet for so long, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she turned to look at me, and her eyes were full of tears. If I tell you, she whispered, her whole body trembling, you have to promise you won't try to help me, because if anyone tries to help me, it's only going to make everything so much worse. She grabbed my arm hard enough that it hurt, and I saw absolute terror in her eyes. Promise me right now that you won't tell anyone what I'm about to say. I stood there frozen, my whole body going cold as Charlotte stared at me with those desperate eyes, and my hands started shaking before I even realized I was nodding. I whispered back that I promised, the words feeling heavy and wrong in my mouth, but I couldn't walk away from the fear I saw in her face. Charlotte took this shaky breath and looked around to make sure nobody was nearby, then started talking fast and quiet. She told me her dad lost everything gambling about 6 months ago, and now he owed really dangerous people more money than he could ever pay back. Those envelope exchanges I saw in the parking lot, she said, That was her handing over cash from a bank account her dad forced her to empty out. The account was supposed to be for Stanford, for her future, but her dad made her drain it bit by bit to pay off his debts. Her voice cracked when she explained that if she didn't fail out of school and stay home to help the family, whatever that meant, her dad threatened to hurt her little brother. I felt sick listening to her, my stomach twisting into knots. Charlotte kept going, telling me how her dad checked her phone constantly and tracked her location and looked at her grades obsessively to make sure she was destroying her future exactly like he demanded. She said he told her that if she tried to tell anyone, or if anyone tried to interfere, he would know right away, and her brother would be the one who paid the price. Her whole body was shaking now, and tears started running down her face. She grabbed my arm again, harder this time, and made me swear again not to tell any teachers or counselors. Last time someone tried to help, she said. Her dad somehow found out, and her brother ended up with a broken arm that everyone believed was from a skateboard accident. She was full on crying now, saying she would rather lose Stanford and throw away everything she worked for than risk her brother getting hurt worse. And that's when it hit me that she'd been carrying this alone for months. Charlotte wiped her eyes with her sleeve and said she had to go before anyone noticed us talking, and she made me promise one more time before she walked away. I sat there behind the gym for maybe 20 minutes after she left, just trying to process what she'd told me. My mind kept racing through everything I'd witnessed over the past few weeks, and now it all made horrible sense. The exhaustion, the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched when that man grabbed her arm in the parking lot, her little brother's scared face when I went to her house. I wanted so badly to run straight to my mom or the guidance counselor or anyone who could help, but I'd given Charlotte my word. Her terror about her brother felt completely real, and I couldn't shake the image of a 12-year-old kid with a broken arm because someone tried to help his sister. That night, I barely slept at all. I kept going over every detail Charlotte had shared, trying to figure out if there was any possible way to help without breaking my promise or putting her brother in more danger. I thought about the man in the parking lot and how Charlotte's whole body had gone stiff when he grabbed her, and I knew this was way beyond normal family problems. This was something serious and scary, and I had no idea what to do about it. I stared at my ceiling for hours, my brain running in circles. Around 3 a.m, I finally fell asleep, but had these awful dreams about Charlotte and her brother trapped in their house with their angry dad. The next morning, I got to the school early and positioned myself where I could see the parking lot. Charlotte's car pulled in around 7:30, and she sat there for a minute before getting out, looking completely exhausted and defeated. When she finally walked toward the building, she saw me watching and gave this tiny nod, like she was checking to make sure I'd kept quiet. I nodded back but felt terrible inside because staying silent meant watching her destroy her entire future, while her dad got away with hurting her. In English class, my mom handed back the essays, and when she got to Charlotte's desk, she just placed a paper with a big 0 written on top. Charlotte took it without any reaction at all, like she'd already given up on fighting or caring. My mom looked frustrated and sad, but she had absolutely no idea what was really happening, and I sat there 3 rows back knowing the truth, but unable to say a single word about it. After class, my mom stood at her desk looking at Charlotte's empty seat with this confused expression, probably wondering how her star student had fallen so far so fast. At lunch, I found Harper Melton sitting alone at a table near the windows. Harper was the one classmate I trusted completely, someone who actually thought things through instead of just gossiping. I sat down across from her and started asking these careful hypothetical questions about what someone should do if they knew a friend was in serious trouble, but had promised not to tell anyone. Harper listened to me without interrupting, her eyes getting more serious as I talked around the situation without giving away who I meant. When I finished, she was quiet for a minute, then said sometimes keeping a promise wasn't the same thing as actually helping, which just made me feel even more torn up and confused. She asked if this hypothetical friend was in danger right now, and I said maybe, probably. I didn't know for sure. Harper suggested that maybe there were ways to help that didn't involve directly breaking a promise, and I felt this small spark of hope that maybe she was right. That afternoon during study hall, I pulled out a notebook and started writing down everything I could remember. I wrote the dates and times of every incident I'd witnessed, described the man in the parking lot and his car, noted Charlotte's bruises and her brother's scared face and the envelope exchanges. I filled up 3 pages with details, being as specific as I could about what I'd seen with my own eyes. After school, I found Harper again and showed her what I'd written. She read through it carefully and then said, maybe if we kept documenting things and gathering evidence, Charlotte might eventually feel safe enough to let us report it. We agreed to both keep track of anything concerning we noticed, and Harper said she'd try to get photos or video if she saw anything suspicious. It felt like at least we were doing something, even if it meant watching and waiting instead of acting right away. I went home that night feeling slightly less helpless, knowing I had a plan that didn't involve breaking my word to Charlotte, but might still lead somewhere useful. Wednesday afternoon came, and I positioned myself near the science building where I had a clear view of the parking lot without being obvious. I pulled out my phone and opened a notes app, trying to look like I was just killing time between classes. At exactly 3:15, the same dark sedan from last week pulled into the far corner of the lot, and I felt my stomach tighten. Charlotte appeared 5 minutes later, walking fast with her head down and her hands shoved in her jacket pockets. I started typing everything I could see into my notes, describing the car as a black or dark blue four-door sedan with tinted windows and a dent in the rear bumper. The man who got out was maybe 40 years old, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, with dark hair and a scar visible on his left cheek even from this distance. When Charlotte reached him, he grabbed her arm exactly like last time, and I watched her whole body go rigid. He said something I couldn't hear, and Charlotte nodded quickly, then pulled an envelope from her backpack and handed it over. The man opened it right there and counted what was inside, his face angry the whole time. Then he shoved the envelope in his jacket and said something else that made Charlotte flinch. I managed to get my phone camera open and took 3 quick photos, knowing they'd be blurry from this far away but hoping they'd show something useful. The whole exchange lasted maybe 2 minutes before the man got back in his car and drove away, and Charlotte stood there alone in the parking lot with her arms wrapped around herself like she was freezing even though it wasn't that cold. I watched her walk to her car and sit inside for a long time before starting the engine, and I wondered what she was thinking about, or if she was crying where no one could see. That evening after dinner, I locked my bedroom door and opened my laptop, typing in searches about financial coercion and parental abuse, and what happens when someone is forced to give away their money. The websites I found made everything worse because they all described exactly what Charlotte had told me, using terms like economic abuse and financial exploitation and coercive control. One site explained how abusers often threaten family members to maintain power, and another talked about how victims feel trapped because reporting can trigger retaliation. Every article said to contact authorities immediately, but also warned that removing someone from an abusive situation required careful safety planning, and I felt completely stuck between knowing Charlotte needed help and being terrified that getting help would put her brother in more danger. I read stories from other people who'd tried to help friends or family members escape abuse, and some of them worked out, but others ended with the victim going back, or the abuser escalating violence, and I didn't know how to tell which outcome Charlotte would get. The research made me feel more helpless instead of less, because now I understood how complicated and dangerous this situation really was. My mom knocked on my door around 9 asking if I wanted tea, and I quickly closed all the browser tabs before telling her to come in. She sat on the edge of my bed and asked if everything was okay at the school, saying I seemed distracted lately and she was worried about me. I almost told her everything right then because keeping Charlotte's secret was eating me alive. But then I remembered Charlotte's face when she talked about her brother and what happened last time someone interfered. Instead, I asked my mom a general question about what teachers do when they think a student might be in trouble at home, trying to sound casual like I was just curious. My mom explained that teachers are mandated reporters, which means if they suspect abuse or neglect, they're legally required to contact Child Protective Services immediately, and she said the school takes these situations very seriously because student safety comes first. I asked what happens after a report gets made, and my mom said, CPS investigates and sometimes removes kids from homes if there's immediate danger, but she admitted the system doesn't always work perfectly, and sometimes kids fall through the cracks. The way she explained the mandatory reporting rules made me realize that if I told my mom what I knew, she'd have to report it right away whether Charlotte wanted her to or not, and Charlotte's dad would definitely figure out that Charlotte had talked. The next day, Charlotte wasn't in first period calculus, and I spent the entire class staring at her empty desk and imagining terrible things. Maybe her dad found out about the counselor trying to talk to her yesterday and punished her, or maybe something happened with the money people he owed, or maybe she was just sick, but my brain wouldn't let me believe that. When second period started, I saw Charlotte slip into her seat in the back row, and relief flooded through me until I noticed she was wearing a long-sleeved shirt, even though the classroom was warm. She kept tugging the sleeves down over her hands, and when she reached up to brush hair from her face, I saw dark bruises circling her left wrist, like someone had grabbed her hard. I caught her eye across the room and she looked at me for just a second, before shaking her head in this tiny warning motion that clearly meant don't ask, don't say anything, don't make this worse. During third period, I was walking past the guidance counselor's office when I saw Charlotte being led inside, and I positioned myself at a water fountain across the hall where I could see through the door window. The counselor was a woman in her 50s who always seemed nice but kind of overwhelmed, and I watched her gesture at Charlotte to sit down and start asking questions. Charlotte sat completely still with her face blank and her hands folded in her lap, and every time the counselor asked something, Charlotte either shook her head or gave one-word answers that clearly weren't helpful. The counselor's expression shifted from concerned to frustrated, and finally to defeated as Charlotte refused to engage. And after about 15 minutes, she had to let Charlotte leave because you can't force someone to accept help they won't take. I knew this was another failed intervention that Charlotte would probably pay for later. When her dad heard the school was asking questions again, and I felt angry at the system for being so useless and angry at myself for not knowing what else to do. At lunch, I looked for Charlotte and found her sitting alone at the far edge of campus near the maintenance building where hardly anyone went, and I realized she was isolating herself on purpose to avoid more people getting suspicious and asking questions. I met up with Harper near the library and told her about the counselor's failed attempt, and Harper said we needed to find a way to document what was happening without Charlotte knowing, so she couldn't be blamed for anyone finding out. It felt sneaky and wrong, but Harper pointed out that Charlotte's dad was monitoring her so closely that any help Charlotte actively participated in would put her at risk, so maybe the only way to help was to build a case without her involvement. I didn't like it, but I couldn't think of a better option. That afternoon, during an assembly, the principal announced the new valedictorian, some kid named Noah Smith who'd been ranked second behind Charlotte all year, and I watched Charlotte's face from 3 rows back. She didn't react at all, didn't even blink, just stared straight ahead like she'd already mourned this loss privately and had nothing left to feel about it. After the assembly, I went to the bathroom and found Maya crying at the sinks, mascara running down her face as she told another girl that she missed her best friend and didn't understand what happened to Charlotte. I stood in a stall listening to Maya say they'd been inseparable since 6th grade. And then suddenly Charlotte blocked her on everything and wouldn't explain why, and I wanted so badly to tell Maya the truth, but I couldn't risk it getting back to Charlotte's dad somehow. After school, I drove past Charlotte's house even though I knew it was probably a bad idea, and I saw her dad's car in the driveway along with another vehicle I didn't recognize, a white pickup truck with contractor plates. I wondered if her dad was meeting with whoever he owed money to, or maybe someone involved in whatever scheme had gotten him in debt. And the thought of Charlotte and her brother trapped inside that house with angry men talking about money made my chest feel tight. All the curtains were closed and the house looked dark and uninviting, not like a place where anyone would want to live, and I tried to imagine what their daily life was like when no one from the school was watching. My mom came home that evening looking upset and stressed, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter harder than necessary. She told me Charlotte had failed another major test in English, this one worth 25% of the final grade, and with her current trajectory, she was at serious risk of not graduating at all. I asked how someone could go from perfect student to possibly not graduating in just a few weeks, and my mom said it seemed extreme even for someone trying to fail on purpose, like Charlotte was actively sabotaging herself beyond what made sense. I asked if there was any way to help a student who was clearly struggling this badly, and my mom said they'd tried everything, offered tutoring and extensions and counseling, and none of it worked, because Charlotte refused every single offer of assistance. That night, I messaged Maya asking if she remembered anything unusual happening around the time Charlotte started pulling away, trying to gather more information about the timeline. Maya responded right away saying Charlotte had suddenly become obsessed with checking her phone constantly around February, like she was afraid of missing messages, and she'd seemed increasingly scared of going home after school. Maya said Charlotte had mentioned family problems once but refused to elaborate and then cut off all contact a few days later, blocking Maya on everything without explanation. I thanked Maya for the information and lay in bed thinking about how all these pieces fit together. The timeline suggesting Charlotte's dad's gambling debts had come due around February, and he'd started forcing Charlotte to destroy her future as punishment or leverage or both. The next morning, I got to the school early and parked where I could see the drop-off area. Charlotte's dad pulled up in his car and I watched him lean toward the passenger window where Charlotte sat. His mouth moved, and even from this distance I could see Charlotte's whole body go stiff. She nodded quickly and got out of the car, and her dad sat there watching her walk toward the building. Charlotte stopped after a few steps and pulled out her phone, checking it like she was expecting something urgent. She walked a few more feet and checked it again. Her dad finally drove away, and Charlotte stood in the parking lot for at least a full minute just staring at her phone screen before she headed inside. I followed at a distance and noticed she kept pulling her phone out between classes, glancing at it nervously every few minutes like she was scared of missing a message. In calculus, Charlotte sat in the back like she had been doing for weeks now. When the bell rang, Mr. Taylor asked her to stay after class. Most of the other students filed out, and I hung back near the door pretending to organize my bag. Mr. Taylor pulled a chair up next to Charlotte's desk and sat down. He started talking about extra credit options and tutoring sessions that could help her catch up on everything she'd failed. Charlotte stared at the desk and didn't respond. Mr. Taylor kept going, explaining how she could still salvage her grade if she put in the work now. Charlotte finally looked up at him and said she wasn't interested in catching up because she wasn't going to college anyway. Her voice was flat and empty. Mr. Taylor looked shocked and started to argue that she was too smart to give up, that Stanford had been her dream. Charlotte stood up and grabbed her bag. She walked out while he was still mid-sentence. I watched Mr. Taylor sit there alone at the desk looking completely defeated, like he'd just watched someone drown and couldn't reach them in time. After school, I met Harper in the library at a table in the back corner where no one else was sitting. I'd asked her to help me because she was the only person I trusted completely, and she was good at noticing details. We spread out everything I'd documented so far with dates and times and descriptions of what I'd seen. Harper looked through the notes carefully and pointed out that the parking lot exchanges I'd witnessed both happened on Wednesdays. She pulled up a calendar on her phone and checked back through my notes. Every Wednesday like clockwork. That meant Charlotte's dad had some kind of regular payment schedule with whoever he owed money to. Harper suggested we try to get better photos or video next Wednesday, now that we knew when to expect it. I agreed even though the idea of deliberately watching and recording made me nervous. It felt dangerous, like we were getting involved in something that could blow back on us. But we needed better evidence if this was ever going to help Charlotte. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about what Charlotte and her brother's home life must be like when no one from the school was watching. I sat at my computer Saturday night and searched for information about Child Protective Services procedures. I learned that reports could be made anonymously, and that CPS was supposed to investigate within a certain time frame. But I also read stories about kids who got reported and nothing changed. Or worse, about situations where parents found out someone had called and retaliated before CPS could act. I kept thinking about Charlotte's warning that if anyone tried to help, it would only make things worse for her brother. If I reported and CPS didn't remove the kids immediately, Charlotte's dad would know someone had told. He'd already threatened to hurt her brother before. What would he do if he thought Charlotte had talked, or if he suspected someone was watching him? I closed my laptop feeling more scared and helpless than before I'd started researching. Monday morning, Charlotte showed up with a visible bruise on her cheekbone. She'd tried to cover it with makeup, but it was obvious if you looked closely. I watched from my locker as the school nurse spotted her in the hallway between first and second period. The nurse touched Charlotte's arm and guided her toward the nurse's office. Through the window, I could see the nurse asking questions and writing notes on a clipboard. Charlotte's answers looked short, probably 1 or 2 words each. Her body language was closed off, arms crossed, shoulders hunched. The nurse kept writing and asking more questions. Charlotte shook her head several times. After about 10 minutes, Charlotte left the nurse's office and walked past me without making eye contact. I knew she'd just lied about how she got the bruise because that's what she had to do to protect her brother. At lunch, I found Charlotte sitting in her usual spot behind the gym building. I approached slowly and sat down a few feet away from her. I asked if she was okay without mentioning the bruise directly. She said she was fine in a tone that clearly meant leave me alone. We sat in silence for a minute. Then Charlotte said quietly that her brother was scared all the time now. She said she was the only thing standing between him and their dad's anger, and if she wasn't there to take the blame for things, her dad would turn on him instead. Her voice cracked a little when she said it. I told Charlotte I was keeping my promise not to tell anyone, but I was documenting things I observed just in case she ever changed her mind about getting help. She looked at me with this expression that mixed gratitude and complete despair. She said she appreciated that I cared enough to pay attention. Then she begged me to be careful because her dad had ways of finding things out, and she didn't want me to get hurt too. I promised to be discreet and not do anything that would trace back to her. That afternoon, my mom came home from the school looking stressed and tired. She dropped her bag on the kitchen counter and told me she'd been called into a meeting with the principal and guidance counselor about Charlotte's academic situation. They were seriously considering whether Charlotte could even graduate at this point with her current grades and the amount of work she'd failed to turn in. I asked what usually happened to students who were at risk of not graduating senior year. My mom said normally the school offered interventions like tutoring, extensions on assignments, alternative credit options, but Charlotte was refusing every single offer of help they extended. The school couldn't force her to accept assistance, and without her cooperation, there wasn't much they could do except watch her fail. Wednesday morning, Harper and I positioned ourselves in different locations with clear views of the parking lot. I sat in my car near the back entrance. Harper parked on the other side near the main lot. We both had our phones ready to record. Right on schedule, around 3:15, Charlotte's dad's car pulled into the lot. The same man from before walked up to the car. Charlotte's dad stayed in the driver's seat, but I could see him watching through the windshield. Charlotte came out of the building and walked toward them. The man grabbed her arm hard enough that I could see his fingers digging in even from where I was parked. I started recording video on my phone, zooming in as much as I could while keeping the image steady. Charlotte reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to the man. He took it and said something to her that made her flinch. Then he walked back to his own car. I kept recording as he drove away, managing to capture his license plate number clearly this time. Harper texted me that she'd gotten good footage too from her angle. After school, we met up and compared our videos. Mine showed Charlotte's dad sitting in his car watching the entire exchange to make sure Charlotte followed through with handing over the envelope. Harper's footage had a clear shot of the man's license plate as he drove away, and also showed the moment when he grabbed Charlotte's arm roughly. We both felt like we'd captured something important and concrete. Physical evidence that this wasn't just Charlotte having family problems or struggling with pressure. This was something real and threatening happening to her. We just weren't sure yet what to do with the evidence or how to use it without making things worse for Charlotte and her brother. The next morning, I watched Charlotte walk into English class looking worse than I'd ever seen her. Dark circles under her eyes made her look sick. Her hands shook as she set her bag down. My mom started the lesson and Charlotte just stared at her desk. About 15 minutes and Charlotte's head drooped forward and she was asleep. The whole class noticed. My mom stopped mid-sentence and walked over to Charlotte's desk. She touched Charlotte's shoulder gently, and Charlotte jerked awake so hard her chair scraped backward. She looked around confused and scared like she didn't know where she was. My mom's face changed from annoyed to worried. Charlotte mumbled an apology and tried to sit up straighter, but her eyes kept closing. My mom told her it was okay, and went back to teaching, but kept glancing at Charlotte with this expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't disappointment anymore. It was concern mixed with something else. Suspicion, maybe. After class, my mom asked me to wait. Everyone else filed out and she closed the door partway. She asked if I knew what was going on with Charlotte. Her voice was quiet and serious. She said Charlotte's behavior looked like patterns she'd learned about in training, patterns of abuse or severe stress. I felt my stomach twist because I knew exactly what was happening, but I'd promised Charlotte. My mom was looking at me waiting for an answer. I said I thought Charlotte had serious family problems, but she was scared to talk about them. My mom asked what kind of family problems. I said I didn't know details, but Charlotte seemed really afraid. My mom was quiet for a second and then said she was going to document her concerns officially. She was going to make sure the guidance counselor followed up more seriously this time. I felt panic rising in my chest because more adult attention was exactly what Charlotte feared. I tried to warn my mom to be careful without breaking my promise. I said Charlotte had mentioned being worried about her little brother, that if anyone interfered, things might get worse for him. My mom looked at me hard and asked what I meant by that. I said I just knew Charlotte was protective of her brother and scared something bad would happen to him. My mom said that made her even more concerned and she had to report this. She was a mandated reporter and couldn't ignore signs of potential abuse. I left feeling sick because I'd just triggered the exact thing Charlotte was terrified of. That afternoon, I was in history class when I saw Charlotte check her phone. Her face went completely white. She stood up suddenly and the teacher asked where she was going. Charlotte didn't answer. She just grabbed her bag and rushed out of the room. I waited about 30 seconds and then asked to use the bathroom. I followed the direction Charlotte had gone and found her in the girls' bathroom. She was leaning over a sink, breathing really fast. Her whole body was shaking. She was crying and gasping, and I realized she was having a panic attack. I went over and put my hand on her back. I told her to breathe slowly, in through her nose and out through her mouth. She tried, but she couldn't get control of her breathing. She kept saying her dad was going to be so angry. The school had called. They wanted a meeting. He was going to know she said something. I kept telling her to breathe, and after a few minutes, she started to calm down enough to talk. She said her dad would assume she told someone something to make the school call. Tonight was going to be bad for both her and her brother. She was shaking so hard I thought she might fall. I realized my mom's actions might have just put both kids in immediate danger. Charlotte kept saying her dad would be so angry and her brother was going to get hurt, and it was all her fault. I felt terrible because I'd contributed to this by talking to my mom even vaguely. Then I had an idea. I told Charlotte I had video evidence of the parking lot exchanges. Video that didn't involve her telling anyone anything. Maybe we could use that to show the school had independent reasons for concern. Charlotte looked at me with wide, scared eyes. She asked if I was sure the video didn't show her talking to me. I promised it was just footage of the exchanges. Just her and the man and the envelope. Nothing that showed her disclosing anything. Charlotte stopped shaking as much. She thought for a minute. Then she said, maybe if the school thought they discovered the problem themselves through observation, her dad couldn't blame her for it. She asked me to show the video to the guidance counselor, but to make it really clear, I took it without Charlotte knowing. That I was just worried and documenting things on my own. I agreed this might be our best chance to get help without Charlotte taking the blame. Charlotte made me promise to emphasize that she had no idea I was filming. I promised, and she nodded and wiped her eyes. I went straight to the guidance counselor's office. The counselor was at her desk and looked up when I knocked. I said I needed to talk to her about Charlotte. She let me in and closed the door. I explained that I'd been worried about Charlotte for weeks and had started documenting concerning things I witnessed. I pulled out my phone and showed her the video Harper and I had taken. The counselor watched carefully. Her expression got more serious as she saw the man grab Charlotte's arm. She watched Charlotte hand over the envelope. She saw Charlotte's dad sitting in his car watching the whole thing. When the video ended, she asked why I didn't report this immediately. I said I was trying to gather evidence because Charlotte seemed too scared to ask for help herself. I made it really clear that Charlotte had no idea I was filming. That this was all me acting on my own because I was worried. The counselor asked if I had more footage. I showed her Harper's video with the license plate. The counselor took notes and asked me questions about when this happened and if I'd seen it more than once. I told her it happened every Wednesday like clockwork. She thanked me and said she needed to report this to administration, possibly to law enforcement too. She asked me not to tell Charlotte I showed the video yet, because they needed to handle this carefully. I felt relieved that adults were finally getting involved, but also scared about what would happen next. Especially to Charlotte's brother. That evening, my mom came home looking stressed. She sat down at the kitchen table and told me the school was consulting with Child Protective Services about Charlotte's situation. They were planning to have a caseworker at tomorrow's parent meeting. I asked what would happen if Charlotte's dad got violent. My mom said they'd have the school resource officer there as a precaution. That made me feel slightly better, but I was still worried. I kept thinking about Charlotte and her brother at home right now with their dad knowing the school had called. I wondered if he was yelling at them, if he was hurting them. My mom must have seen my face because she said sometimes these situations got worse before they got better, but they had to intervene. She said if they didn't act and something happened to those kids, she'd never forgive herself. I understood, but I couldn't stop thinking about Charlotte's face in the bathroom, how scared she'd been, how sure she was that tonight would be bad. I pulled out my phone and typed carefully, trying to find words that wouldn't sound too obvious if her dad checked her messages. Tomorrow might be intense, but people are trying to help the right way, I wrote, then stared at the screen for a full minute before hitting send. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her response came through. Okay. Just that one word, and I sat there holding my phone wondering if she understood what I was trying to tell her, or if I'd just made everything worse. I kept checking my messages every few minutes like she might send something else. Some sign that she wasn't scared or angry. But nothing came. My mom made dinner and I barely tasted it, pushing food around my plate while my brain ran through every possible way tomorrow could go wrong. What if Charlotte's dad figured out the school was planning something and took both kids somewhere we couldn't find them? What if he hurt them before anyone could stop him? I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, my stomach tight with worry, playing out scenario after scenario until my alarm went off and I realized I hadn't slept at all. I got to the school early and went straight to Charlotte's first period classroom, waiting by the door to see if she'd show up. Students filed past me and the bell rang and she wasn't there. Her seat stayed empty. I checked my phone again, but there were no new messages. Second period, I walked past her brother's classroom and looked through the window during the break, scanning the room twice to make sure. But he wasn't there either. My hand started shaking as I pulled out my phone and texted Harper. Charlotte and her brother aren't here. What if their dad ran? Harper responded immediately saying she was in the library and to meet her there. I practically ran down the hallway, my heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Harper was sitting at a table in the back corner looking just as worried as I felt. Maybe they're just sick, she said, but neither of us believed it. We sat there watching the clock on the wall, each minute feeling like an hour. The parent meeting was supposed to happen at 9 and it was already 8:45. What if he didn't come? I whispered. What if he took them and left town? Harper chewed on her thumbnail, something I'd never seen her do before. The school would call the police, right? They have to. But I kept thinking about Charlotte's face in the bathroom, how scared she'd been, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd pushed too hard too fast, and now something terrible was happening. The bell rang for lunch and I'd barely made it to my locker when the guidance counselor appeared next to me. Can we talk? She asked, and I followed her to her office with my stomach doing flips. She closed the door and sat down behind her desk, looking tired and stressed. Charlotte's father came to the meeting this morning, she said, and I felt a tiny bit of relief that at least he hadn't run. He came alone, said both kids were homesick with the flu. My relief disappeared immediately. When the CPS caseworker asked to do a home visit to check on them, he became very hostile, started yelling about his rights and how dare we accuse him of anything. The counselor rubbed her forehead like she had a headache. It got bad enough that Officer Shaw had to step in. Officer Shaw was the school resource officer, a big guy who usually just dealt with fights in the parking lot. What happened? I asked. The counselor explained that Charlotte's dad had threatened to sue the school and CPS, had called everyone in the room incompetent, and had refused to allow any home visit without a warrant. We're arranging an active welfare check through the local police, she said. But it requires coordination and paperwork. It's not something that happens instantly. I felt sick. So Charlotte and her brother are just stuck there with him right now? While he's angry and knows people are trying to help them? The counselor's face told me everything I needed to know before she even answered. Are they safe? I asked, my voice coming out higher than normal. The counselor was quiet for a second too long. Honestly, I don't know. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. Without Charlotte making a direct disclosure or visible injuries that require immediate medical attention, we have to follow procedures. And procedures take time. I wanted to scream at her that time was exactly what we didn't have, that Charlotte's dad was probably hurting them right now because he knew we were trying to intervene. This is how kids get hurt, I said, and I could hear my voice shaking. Everyone following procedures while someone's dad is beating them at home. The counselor looked pained, but she didn't disagree. I understand your frustration. The system is designed to protect parental rights, which means sometimes it moves slower than we'd like when children are in danger. But we're doing everything we can within the legal framework. I stood up because I couldn't sit still anymore. When will the police check on them? She checked her computer. They're trying to coordinate it for this afternoon. The caseworker is pushing for it to happen today. I left her office feeling completely helpless, like I'd set something in motion that was now moving too slowly to actually protect anyone. The hallways were full of students heading to the cafeteria, but I couldn't imagine eating anything. Harper found me sitting on the floor outside the gym after lunch, my phone in my hand even though I had no one to call who could help. Hey, she said, sliding down the wall to sit next to me. I did something maybe I shouldn't have. I looked at her and she pulled out her own phone. During lunch, I drove past Charlotte's house. My heart jumped. You what? Harper showed me a photo on her screen. Charlotte's dad's car was in the driveway, and parked on the street in front were 2 police vehicles, their lights off but definitely official. I didn't stop or anything, Harper said quickly. I just drove by slow enough to see. There were cops at the front door. I stared at the photo, trying to figure out what it meant. Did you see Charlotte? Or her brother? Harper shook her head. Just the cars and the cops on the porch. I circled back around 10 minutes later and they were still there. So whatever they were doing took a while. I saved the photo to my own phone like having proof of the welfare check would somehow make it more real. At least someone's checking on them, I said, but I spent the rest of the afternoon checking my messages every 30 seconds, waiting for Charlotte to text me that she was okay, that the police had helped, that something had changed. My phone stayed silent. In last period, I couldn't focus on anything the teacher was saying, just watched the clock and wondered what was happening at Charlotte's house right now. My mom came home around 6, looking exhausted and stressed in a way I'd only seen a few times before. She dropped her bag on the kitchen table and sat down heavily. "The welfare check happened," she said without me even having to ask. I sat down across from her, my whole body tense. "And?" Mom's expression made my stomach drop before she even spoke. Charlotte and her brother both denied any abuse. They said their dad never hurt them, that everything was fine, that they were just sick today, and that's why they missed school. I felt like I'd been punched. But we have video evidence. We have reports from multiple teachers. How can they just say nothing's wrong? Mom rubbed her eyes. Charlotte's father apparently coached them very carefully on what to say. He was present during the entire check because the police didn't have grounds to separate them for questioning. The kids were too scared to contradict him with him standing right there listening to every word. I thought about Charlotte in the bathroom telling me how terrified she was of her brother getting hurt, and I realized she and her brother had just lied to protect each other while their dad watched. "So, CPS can't do anything?" I asked. Mom shook her head slowly. Without the children's cooperation or immediate evidence of danger, they can't remove them. The caseworker documented concerns and will follow up, but removal requires meeting specific legal thresholds that we haven't reached yet. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is insane. We have proof he's hurting them. We have video of him forcing Charlotte to give money to some guy. We have teachers who've seen bruises. And they're just going to leave those kids in that house? Mom looked at me with this sad, tired expression. "I know how you feel. I'm angry too. But parental rights are very strong in this country. The system is designed to keep families together unless there's overwhelming evidence of danger." I wanted to throw something. What counts as overwhelming evidence? Does someone have to die first? Mom reached out like she was going to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "The caseworker, Emmeline, she's good at her job. She'll keep following up. Sometimes these cases take time to build." I thought about Charlotte and her brother trapped in that house tonight with their dad, who now knew for certain that people were watching him, that the school had called CPS, that there was an investigation. "He's going to be so angry," I said quietly. "He's going to hurt them because we tried to help." Mom didn't have an answer for that, and her silence was worse than anything she could have said. I went up to my room and lay on my bed staring at my phone, willing Charlotte to message me, to tell me she was okay, but the screen stayed dark and empty. Charlotte came back to the school the next day, and I saw her in the hallway between first and second period. She had her head down, walking fast like she was trying to be invisible. I called her name, but she didn't stop or even look in my direction. In calculus, she sat in the very back corner instead of her usual front row seat, and when Mr. and Taylor tried to make eye contact with her, she just stared at her desk. At lunch, I found her sitting alone behind the gym in the same spot where she'd told me everything, and I walked over slowly, not wanting to scare her. "Charlotte," I said softly. She looked up and her eyes were red like she'd been crying, and when she saw me, she immediately stood up and grabbed her bag. "Wait, please," I said. "I just want to make sure you're okay." She walked past me without saying anything, and I followed her. "I know you're mad at me. I know you think I made everything worse." Charlotte stopped walking but didn't turn around. "You don't know anything," she said, her voice flat and cold. "I'm sorry," I said. "I was trying to help." She turned then, and the look on her face made me step back. "You promised you wouldn't tell anyone. You promised." Her hands were shaking, and I could see her fighting to keep her voice steady. "I didn't tell them what you said. I showed them video evidence I took on my own. Your dad can't blame you for that." Charlotte laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "You think that matters? You think he cares about the difference?" She wiped her eyes roughly. "Just leave me alone. Please." She walked away quickly, and this time I didn't follow. Harper caught up with me after school looking grim. "I need to tell you something," she said, and we walked to her car so we could talk privately. I was in the bathroom during lunch, and Maya was there with some other girls. She was talking about Charlotte. I waited, my stomach already sinking. She said Charlotte's dad pulled her out of all her after-school activities. No more debate team, no more volunteer work, nothing. And he's picking her up immediately after school now, like the second the bell rings. Harper showed me her phone where she'd apparently been taking notes. Maya said she tried to talk to Charlotte yesterday after school, and Charlotte's dad was already there in the parking lot, just sitting in his car watching. When Charlotte came out, he made her get in immediately, and they left. I felt sick thinking about it. Charlotte's dad was tightening his control in response to the investigation, making sure she had zero freedom, zero chance to talk to anyone. "She's even more trapped than before," I said. Harper nodded. "Maya's really worried. She said Charlotte looks terrified all the time now." We sat in Harper's car for a while, not saying anything, both of us feeling helpless and guilty even though we'd been trying to do the right thing. In English class the next day, Charlotte turned in her essay, and my mom's face changed as she read it. After class, she asked me to stay behind, and once everyone else had left, she showed me Charlotte's paper. It was barely a page long, the sentences didn't make sense, and the handwriting looked shaky and rushed. This was so far below Charlotte's normal work that it didn't even seem like the same person had written it. "This is what I'm talking about. my mom said quietly. This is a student who's falling apart and we can't help her because she won't let us. She looked at me directly. Do you know if Charlotte is being hurt at home? I'd been avoiding this conversation, but I couldn't anymore. I told her about the video Harper and I had taken, about the envelope exchanges and Charlotte's dad watching from his car. I told her about the failed welfare check, and how Charlotte and her brother had been too scared to tell the truth with their dad standing right there. My mom listened to everything, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Thank you for telling me, she finally said. I'm going to document all of this and make sure it gets added to the CPS file. Sometimes it takes multiple reports and multiple pieces of evidence before the system can act. I wanted to ask how much evidence was enough, how bad things had to get before someone could actually protect Charlotte and her brother, but I already knew my mom didn't have those answers. I left the classroom feeling like we were all just watching Charlotte sink, and nobody could throw her a rope that would actually reach. My mom didn't say anything for a while and just looked at Charlotte's paper again. She finally put it down and said, "Sometimes the system fails kids, and all we can do is keep trying and writing everything down until we have enough to make them act." She asked me to watch for anything else that seemed wrong and promised she'd do the same thing. I felt a little better knowing my mom was really trying to help now instead of just being confused about why Charlotte was failing. The following week, Charlotte didn't come to the school Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. When she showed up Thursday, she had a note from a doctor saying she'd been sick, but she didn't look sick at all. She looked scared. The school nurse saw her in the hallway and pulled her into the office, and I watched through the window as the nurse asked questions. Charlotte just stared at the floor the whole time and gave short answers. The nurse wrote stuff down, but Charlotte wouldn't look at her. Harper found me after school on Friday and said she'd talked to Charlotte's brother when he was waiting outside. He told her their dad was really angry all the time now and kept yelling about people getting in their family's business. He said Charlotte cried in her room every night and he was scared something bad was going to happen soon. Harper went straight to the guidance counselor and told her everything the kid had said. The next day, Emmeline Bishop showed up at the school. She's the CPS worker who'd been assigned to Charlotte's case. She pulled Charlotte out of first period and interviewed her in a private room for almost an hour. Then she did the same thing with Charlotte's brother. This time, Emmeline asked them directly if they felt safe at home. I don't know what either of them said, but after both interviews, Emmeline went into the principal's office and stayed there for over an hour. I kept hoping this meant they were finally building a strong enough case to do something real. That afternoon, I was in the parking lot and saw Charlotte standing by herself. Her dad's car wasn't there yet. I walked over fast and asked if she was okay. She looked around nervously and said her dad knew someone from the school had talked to her brother. He was really mad about it. She said she was scared he was going to hurt her brother to punish them both for all the people interfering. Her whole body was shaking. I asked her what we could do, and she said the Wednesday envelope thing was getting worse. Her dad owed even more money now, and the people he borrowed from were saying they'd hurt him if he didn't pay. She'd been taking money out of her savings account, the one that was supposed to pay for college. Now there was almost nothing left. She didn't know what her dad would do when the money ran out completely. I told her we needed to tell Emmeline about the money because that was the kind of thing that might give CPS more power to act. Charlotte shook her head hard and said if she admitted her dad made her give away her college money, he'd know she talked. Then her brother would be the one who paid for it. I felt stuck between wanting to help and knowing Charlotte was terrified her brother would get hurt. That night after dinner, I went to my room and called the CPS hotline. I didn't give them my name. I told them about a man forcing his daughter to drain her college savings to pay his gambling debts. I said he was threatening both kids and there was a 12-year-old boy in the house who wasn't safe. The person on the phone said they'd add everything to the file Emmeline already had, and she'd follow up on it. They couldn't tell me what would happen next. The next morning, Emmeline showed up at Charlotte's house without warning. She brought a police officer with her. This time she interviewed both kids separately outside where their dad couldn't watch them or hear what they said. I don't know what Charlotte told her, but my mom got a call from Emmeline later that day. Emmeline said they were moving forward with an emergency court hearing to decide if the kids needed protection. That same afternoon, someone showed up at Charlotte's house to give her dad papers requiring him to come to court. Apparently, he completely lost it in front of the guy delivering the papers and started yelling and threatening. The guy wrote down everything that happened. The school resource officer told the guidance counselor there was finally enough proof of the dad scaring the kids and stealing Charlotte's money to maybe get them removed from the house temporarily. That evening, my phone lit up with a text from Charlotte, and I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it. The message said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." And I felt tears start because I'd been so worried she hated me for everything that happened. She said Emmeline told her the court hearing was tomorrow morning, and there was a real chance she and her brother might get placed with their aunt temporarily while the investigation kept going. She said her aunt lived in a town about 30 minutes away and had already told Emmeline she wanted to take them both in. I texted back asking if she was okay, and she responded that she was scared, but also hopeful for the first time in months. I stayed up late that night thinking about what tomorrow might bring, and hoping the judge would actually help them. The next day, Charlotte and her brother didn't come to the school because they were at the courthouse and I couldn't focus on anything. I kept checking my phone between classes hoping for an update, but nothing came through. Harper found me at lunch and we sat together at our usual table just staring at our phones and barely touching our food. She asked if I'd heard anything, and I shook my head, feeling sick with worry about what was happening in that courtroom. We talked about what might happen if the judge didn't believe Charlotte, or if her dad convinced everyone he was fine. Around 2 p.m. during English class, my mom's phone rang and she stepped out into the hallway to answer it. I watched through the door window as she talked to someone, her expression serious and focused. When she came back in, she caught my eye and gave a small nod, and I knew it was news about Charlotte. After class, my mom pulled me aside in the empty hallway and told me the principal had just called with an update from the courthouse. The judge granted an emergency protective order after hearing testimony from Charlotte, her brother, and Emmeline about everything that had been happening. Charlotte and her brother were placed with their aunt in the nearby town, at least temporarily, while CPS finished their full investigation. Their dad was only allowed supervised visitation, and he had to stay away from the school completely. My mom said the judge was apparently very concerned about the financial exploitation and the evidence of threats and control. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me, knowing they were finally out of that house and somewhere safe. My mom hugged me and said I did the right thing by not giving up even when it was hard and complicated. That night, Charlotte messaged me again and said she and her brother were at their aunt's house, and it was the first time in months she felt like she could actually breathe. She said her aunt's house was calm and quiet, nothing like the tense, scary atmosphere at home with their dad. Her aunt had made them dinner and didn't ask a million questions, just told them they were safe now and could take time to adjust. Charlotte said her brother actually smiled during dinner when their aunt told a story about their mom from when she was young. She said she started crying when she saw him smile because she hadn't seen him look happy in so long, and her aunt just hugged her and said it was okay to cry. I messaged back that I was so glad they were safe, and she responded with a heart emoji, which was more emotion than I'd seen from her in weeks. The next week, Charlotte returned to the school, and I saw her in the hallway before first period. She looked different somehow, less tense and haunted, even though she still had dark circles under her eyes and looked exhausted. Her shoulders weren't hunched up around her ears anymore, and she made eye contact with people instead of staring at the floor. At lunch, she found me sitting with Harper and sat down at our table without being invited. She looked at both of us and said, "Thank you for real. For not breaking your promise, but finding another way to help anyway." She said knowing someone cared enough to keep trying even when she pushed everyone away gave her hope when she had none left. Harper reached across the table and squeezed Charlotte's hand, and I felt my throat get tight with emotion. Charlotte said her aunt was amazing and her brother was already doing better, sleeping through the night for the first time in months. A few days later, Charlotte had a meeting with the guidance counselor and the principal to talk about her academic situation. I waited outside the office while they met for almost an hour, watching through the window as they looked at papers and talked seriously. When Charlotte came out, she looked tired but not defeated like before. She told me they agreed to let her make up some of the work she'd failed, and they'd provide a path for her to graduate, even though her GPA was destroyed. She wouldn't be valedictorian, obviously, and Stanford was definitely gone, but she could still walk at graduation with our class. They talked about her maybe starting at community college in the fall, while she figured out her next steps and got stable. Charlotte said it wasn't the future she'd planned, but it was better than no future at all, and at least now she had choices again. The next week, Maya approached Charlotte carefully in the hallway between classes, and I watched from a distance as they had a tentative conversation. Charlotte explained some of what happened without going into all the details about her dad and the money and the threats. Maya started crying and pulled Charlotte into a hug right there in the middle of the hallway. They stood there hugging for a long moment while people walked around them, and I saw Charlotte's shoulders shaking like she was crying too. After that, they started sitting together at lunch sometimes, and I'd see them talking quietly, rebuilding their friendship slowly and carefully. It felt like a small piece of Charlotte's old life coming back, and I was glad she had her best friend again. Maya told me later that she felt terrible for not pushing harder when Charlotte first started pulling away, but Charlotte assured her there was nothing she could have done differently. Over the next few weeks, Charlotte started participating in class again, and I even saw her raise her hand a few times to answer questions. My mom told me privately one evening that seeing Charlotte engage with learning again after months of watching her shut down completely was incredibly moving. She said Charlotte had always loved learning and it was painful to watch that light go out, so seeing it come back even a little bit made her want to cry. The other teachers noticed too, and several of them quietly offered Charlotte extra help and extensions on assignments. Mr. Taylor spent time after school helping her catch up on calculus, and the English teacher gave her alternative assignments that would help raise her grade. Everyone seemed invested in helping Charlotte get back on track now that they understood something terrible had been happening. One afternoon, Emmeline came to the school to give an update to the administration, and my mom told me what she'd heard through the principal. The investigation found major evidence of financial exploitation and coercion and emotional abuse. Charlotte's dad was facing criminal charges related to the financial stuff, and possibly other charges related to how he treated the kids. Charlotte and her brother were staying with their aunt for the foreseeable future, while the legal process played out. Charlotte told me at lunch that her aunt was applying to become their permanent legal guardian, and while it would take time to go through the courts, it looked really promising. She said her aunt had already enrolled her brother in counseling, and was looking into therapy for Charlotte too when she was ready. I asked how she felt about all of it, and she said mostly relieved but also sad because this meant accepting her dad was really that bad, and her family was broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. A few weeks after that, Charlotte showed me a picture on her phone of her brother at his new school near their aunt's house. He was sitting at a chessboard smiling at the camera, and Charlotte said he'd joined the chess club and made a friend named Noah, who was teaching him advanced strategies. She said he was slowly coming out of his shell and actually acting like a normal kid instead of being scared and quiet all the time. The picture showed him looking relaxed and happy in a way I'd never seen before when I'd glimpsed him at their old house. Charlotte's eyes got watery as she looked at the photo, and she said, "This is what I was trying to protect by sacrificing everything, and now he's finally safe enough to just be a kid." She said watching him heal made all the lost scholarships and ruined grades feel worth it, because his safety mattered more than anything else. I told her she was incredibly brave, and she shook her head saying she just did what she had to do, but I could tell she was starting to believe maybe she'd done the right thing, even though it cost her so much. The weeks before graduation turned into a blur of Charlotte staying after school to work on makeup assignments and meeting with teachers who offered extra help. I saw her in the library most afternoons, bent over textbooks and papers, and she looked tired but different from before, like she was working towards something instead of destroying it. Her grades climbed slowly but steadily until the guidance counselor confirmed she'd done enough to graduate with our class. On graduation day, I spotted Charlotte in her cap and gown standing with her aunt and brother near the gym entrance, and her brother was bouncing on his toes excited while her aunt straightened Charlotte's collar. When Charlotte's name got called, she walked across the stage steady and calm, and her aunt and brother stood up cheering louder than anyone else in the whole auditorium. I watched Charlotte accept her diploma and turn toward the crowd, and she smiled this huge, genuine smile that made her look like a completely different person than the scared girl who'd sat behind the gym months ago. After the ceremony ended and everyone was taking pictures and hugging, Charlotte found me and Harper near the parking lot. She pulled us both into a tight hug and said we saved her brother's life, and probably hers too by refusing to look away when she was drowning. Her voice cracked a little when she said it, and I felt my own eyes get watery. Charlotte told us she was taking a year off to work and help her brother settle into his new life. Then she'd start community college with the goal of becoming a social worker eventually. She said she wanted to help other kids in situations like hers because she understood what it meant to survive. I looked at her standing there with her diploma and her aunt's arm around her shoulders, and I knew without any doubt she was going to be amazing at it. All right, story time's over. If you made it through that entire emotional roller coaster, congratulations on your resilience. Might as well hit that subscribe button since you clearly enjoy suffering through my storytelling. Also, there's a like button somewhere down there if you feel like clicking things. Anyway, later.